She did not choose solitude. Solitude chose her. Like an ancient tide returning to a forgotten shore, it crept into her life, not with fanfare, but with the soundless weight of inevitability. At first, it was just an empty chair at the table. A voicemail unanswered. The slow fading of invitations. And then, a deeper silence. One not imposed from without, but awakened from within. An invitation from something old and sacred. Something that whispered not of abandonment, but of initiation. The world might have called her alone, but the soul had a different name for her. Wanderer, dreamer, witness, vessel. This is where the journey begins, not in exile, but in the threshold of becoming. For there is a hidden power in the woman who lives without witness, without performance. In her silence, the false scaffolding begins to fall. The old scripts of identity, the dutiful daughter, the accommodating lover, the smiling host, begin to unravel like threadbare cloth, and beneath it all, something breathes, something ancient, something whole. There is a door in the psyche that only opens in silence. Most spend their lives hammering at the front gates of belonging, shouting into the noise of the world to be seen, to be needed, to be loved. But there are others, fewer perhaps, who by chance or choice or divine accident find themselves outside that noise. And in the stillness that follows, they hear it, the soft creak of that hidden door swinging open into a place they've never been, and yet somehow always known. This is not the door of escape. It is the door of return. Return to what? To the innermost self. To the wild landscape of the soul that lies behind the persona, the mask we wear to survive. Carl Jung spoke of the persona as the compromise between the individual and society, the social face we present to the world, but solitude, real solitude, peels that face away. And when it does, many panic, for who are you when no one is watching? She stood at that threshold. There were no maps, no instructions. Only a strange gravity pulling her inward. It was not comfortable. The silence at first was unbearable. It wasn't peace. It was disorientation. Like waking from a dream in a foreign land. No roles to play, no reflections to catch herself in. Just the raw hum of her own existence. And that's when it began, the unraveling, the remembering. In mythology, the heroine's journey is not often told. While the hero slays dragons and climbs mountains, the feminine path is more secret, more internal. It is a descent, a quiet slipping beneath the surface of things into the underworld of the unconscious. The woman who lives alone walks this path, not outwardly, but inwardly, one step at a time into herself. And here, the ego cannot lead. It must be dismantled. There is no room for the ego in the sacred cave of transformation. Solitude strips it bare. Without mirrors, without applause, the ego's voice begins to falter. The masks fall. The performance ends. And what remains is not emptiness, but potential. The psychic space from which something deeper may rise. The self. Not the self that society speaks of, not confidence or success or image, but the capital S self, the totality of who you are, the union of all opposites within. The self is not found. It is revealed, often through suffering, silence, and surrender, and solitude. It is the crucible in which this revelation is forged. In the absence of noise, she begins to hear the whisper. The soul does not shout. It speaks in dream, in symbol, in sensation, in the way sunlight falls across an untouched room, in the ritual of making tea with no one to serve, in the rhythm of her breath at 3 a.m. when no one is near to catch it. These moments are not empty, they are sacred. In this way, the woman who lives alone becomes a vessel. She is no longer performing. She is being, and being in its truest form is an act of great power. Not the power of domination or ambition, but the power of presence. She becomes deeply rooted in the soil of her own soul. And from that root, something begins to grow. Something unnameable, something radiant. But the early stages of this path are not romantic. They are marked by grief. For as the masks fall away, so too do the illusions. The relationships that were built on her giving and giving, hoping someone would finally stay. The identity constructed around being needed, being useful, being liked. She sees now that some connections were not love, but contracts. Conditional, bonds built on her absence from herself, and this realization breaks her, but it also frees her. This is the first rite of passage, the recognition that solitude is not lack, but liberation. To no longer beg for crumbs at someone else's table. To no longer barter pieces of her soul for fleeting approval. To no longer be afraid of her own company. The woman who lives alone, truly alone, is not waiting for someone to fill the silence. She's learning to trust that the silence is full. She begins to sense a sacred architecture emerging in her days. There is a rhythm that arises when we are no longer rushed, no longer scrambling to be enough. She rises when her body calls. She eats when she is hungry. She creates without needing an audience. Her life becomes an offering, not to others, but to the divine that lives within. Every act, no matter how small, becomes ritual. She walks barefoot on wooden floors. She speaks aloud to herself in the mirror. She tends to plants as though they were oracles. She lights candles for no one to see. And in these small gestures, she begins to reweave the thread of meaning. She is not a solitary figure in a story of loneliness. She is the high priestess of her own becoming. There is a fire that burns in the hearth of the woman who lives alone. It is not loud. It does not consume. It glows steadily, like the flame of a watchtower. It is the fire of knowing, of remembering, of being enough. It is the inner sun that rises when the outer world dims, and this fire cannot be given to her. It must be kindled from within. Herein lies her secret power. She is not defined by absence. She is defined by presence. The presence she offers herself. The gaze she no longer needs to borrow, the wholeness she no longer seeks in another's arms. Her solitude is not a wound. It is a womb where a new self is gestating. Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires confrontation with the unconscious, the shadow, and the opposites within us. But before that confrontation can begin, we must create the container, the space, the silence. Without solitude, there is no listening. And without listening, the unconscious remains mute. The woman who lives alone becomes the listening. She attunes herself not to the world's expectations, but to the soul's desires. She no longer asks, "What should I do?" but instead, "What is true?" This shift is radical. It severs her from the collective story of inadequacy. It initiates her into a lineage of women who walk between worlds, mystics, artists, healers, midwives of the invisible. Not all will understand her. Some will pity her. Some will envy her. Some will try to draw her back into the noise, into the role, into the performance. But she knows now, there is no going back. Once you have tasted the deep waters of your own being, shallow praise will never nourish you again. This is her sacred solitude. It is not punishment. It is preparation, the beginning of a long and winding spiral inward, where each turn strips away what is false and draws her closer to the gold hidden beneath the lead. The alchemists called this the opus magnum, the great work. And it begins, always in the dark, in the silence, in the absence that is really the presence of something greater. So she lights a candle in the quiet room. She places her hand over her chest. She listens, not for answers, but for echoes. Echoes of something ancient, something vast, something within. And the door, the one she didn't know existed, opens once more. Not behind her, not ahead of her, but within her. She steps through. And nothing will ever be the same. The persona was always perfectly crafted. It smiled when expected, softened its voice to soothe discomfort, dressed itself in borrowed shapes. It became fluent in the unspoken rules. Don't take up too much space. Don't speak too loudly. Don't want too much. Don't need too deeply. Be agreeable. Be lovely. Be less. But solitude does not entertain falsehoods for long. In the quiet sanctuary of her own space where no one is watching, the persona begins to tremble. Like a mask held too tightly to the face for too many years, it starts to sweat. It itches. It cracks. The woman who lives alone cannot maintain the performance when the audience is gone. There are no scripts to follow here, no one to perform, for no gaze to reflect a pleasing image back to her. And so the mask begins to fall. Carl Jung spoke of the persona as the social facade, the part of the psyche we shape for acceptance and function in the outer world. It is necessary. We need it to survive. But when we over-identify with it, we forget who we are beneath. The persona becomes a prison, and solitude paradoxically becomes the key. Alone, she hears a voice she hasn't heard in years. Not loud, not angry, just there, waiting. A voice not shaped by politeness or performance, but by presence. It comes from deep within, from the cavernous places the persona was designed to guard against. Who are you, it asks, when you are no longer being watched? At first, the answer is silence. There is a vertigo to this unraveling, a disorientation in realizing how much of her life was lived through a mask. She remembers how she'd smile even when she was tired, how she'd say yes when every cell in her body wanted to scream no, how she'd become whatever someone else needed her to be, not out of deception, but out of conditioning, out of love, out of fear. But solitude has no need for performance. In the space where no one else defines her, she begins to meet herself. And the meeting is not gentle. It is raw. It is sobering. It is sacred. Without the persona, the shadow begins to rise. The shadow is all that has been exiled from view. Rage, grief, longing, power. These parts were too much, too dangerous, too unlovable. So she hid them. She buried them under the pleasing smile. She coated them in niceties. But now, alone in her sacred dwelling, they emerge like ghosts from the walls, and they do not ask for permission. She sees her anger for the first time, not as shame, but as signal. Anger that she gave so much, anger that she betrayed herself to belong. Anger that she was taught to shrink. And then, beneath the anger, grief, the oceanic grief of a life half-lived, of dreams postponed for the comfort of others, of the self abandoned for the sake of survival. It is almost unbearable. And yet she bears it, because something in her knows this pain is not punishment, it is passage. The persona is not dissolving to destroy her, but to reveal her, to bring her home. She begins to see herself in the mirror differently, not just her face, but her being, the way her eyes hold entire histories, the way her body tells the truth, even when her words do not. She notices the tension in her jaw that was always there, the tightness in her chest when she tries to prove herself, the way she breathes easier when no one is demanding her to explain, to impress, to entertain. This is the second rite of passage, the shedding. Like a snake outgrowing its skin, she must release what no longer fits. But this is not a graceful process. It is itchy. It is clumsy. It is terrifying to let go of the very mask that once kept her safe. And yet the longer she lives without it, the more clearly she sees that safety was never the same as freedom. She begins to speak more slowly, to pause before saying yes, to notice when her instinct is to perform instead of to be. She does not scold herself. She observes, and observation in solitude becomes alchemy. There is power in watching yourself, without judgment. She writes in her journal, and her handwriting shakes with truth. She names things she has never said aloud, not to anyone, not even to herself. She lets the persona grieve its own death, and in its absence, she makes room. Room for the one underneath. The one who does not smile out of habit. The one who does not shrink to fit. She is luminous, but not polished. She is aching, but not broken. She is whole. Because she is finally honest, Jung taught that the integration of the persona is not its elimination, but its rebalancing. We do not live without masks. We simply cease to confuse them with the face beneath. The woman who lives alone learns this intimately. She does not discard the persona entirely. She reclaims her authority over it. She chooses when to wear it and when to set it down. It no longer wears her. This reclamation is subtle, but seismic. She walks into the world more slowly now, less eager to please, more curious than certain. She holds eye contact a second longer, not as a challenge, but as a mirror. Her presence no longer seeks approval. It offers invitation. An invitation to meet her as she is, or not at all. And yet, even as she steps into this power, doubt lingers. Not the loud kind, but the ancient kind. The internalized myths that whisper, you are selfish to choose yourself, or you are unlovable as you truly are. These voices are not hers. They are echoes from a collective past. From generations of women, taught to disappear behind duty and devotion. But she hears them now. And in hearing, she loosens their hold. She does not silence them with force. She meets them with compassion. She says, I know you are trying to protect me. And then she lets them go, because her life is no longer built on survival. It is being built on truth. And truth in its deepest form is beauty. Not the beauty sold in magazines, not the beauty tailored for consumption, but the fierce, holy beauty of self-recognition, of standing uncloaked before the mirror of the soul and saying, this is who I am. No apology, no embellishment, just being. She begins to reclaim her reflection, the way her laugh fills the room without apology, the way her tears come without shame, the way her silence is no longer empty but full of knowing. This is not the woman the world told her to be. This is the woman she was before the world told her anything at all. And still, she is becoming. Solitude is not the end of her journey. It is the threshold. She is in the in-between now. No longer who she was, not yet who she will be. But even here, there is sacred ground. The ground of unmasking. The chrysalis before the wings, and she is learning to trust this in-between, to trust the days that feel like unraveling, to honor the nights when she misses what once kept her numb, to let herself be undone, knowing that something wiser is being woven in the void. This is not regression. This is regression for the sake of regeneration. Jung called it enantiodromia, the principle by which a thing turns into its opposite. The persona, once a shield, becomes a prison, and solitude, once feared as emptiness, becomes fullness. This is the paradox of transformation. The descent is not failure, it is initiation. So she breathes through the unraveling, she lets the mask fall completely now, and when it hits the floor, She does not rush to pick it up. She leaves it there. She lights a candle instead. She wraps herself in silence. She listens for the voice that only speaks when she is finally still. And the voice says, "You were never meant to be what they expected. You were meant to be what you are." She weeps, not from sadness but from recognition. These are not tears of mourning. They are waters of baptism. She is not losing herself. She is returning, and what returns is radiant. She begins to sing to herself again, not for performance, but for pleasure. She dances barefoot in her living room, not for spectacle, but for embodiment. She begins to choose clothing not to impress, but to express. Her voice deepens, her eyes sharpen, her presence expands, not because she is trying, because she is allowing herself to exist unfiltered, to take up space, to be complex, contradictory, ever-changing. She is no longer a character. She is a soul in motion, and this motion is sacred. It ripples through everything she touches. The way she cooks for herself as though she were a beloved guest, the way she sits with her own sadness as though it were a friend, the way she holds joy without guilt, knowing that her aliveness is not a crime. This is what emerges when the mask is removed. Reverence, not perfection. Not certainty, reverence, for the body that carries her, for the heart that dares to open again, for the mind that questions, dismantles, rebuilds, for the soul that was never lost, only buried. She is not who she was. She is not yet who she will be. But she is no longer pretending, and in this raw, aching, luminous truth, she is finally free. There comes a moment in the life of every solitary woman when the silence ceases to be gentle, when the stillness no longer cradles, but confronts. It is not the comfort of quietude, but the gravity of descent. This is the entry into the Nigredo, the black stage of alchemy, the putrefaction, the necessary decay before rebirth. She does not summon it. It comes unbidden, like winter to the forest, inevitable and without apology. At first, she resists. She busies herself with the rituals of surface life, laundry, lists, phone calls, scrolling. But the silence deepens. The familiar rhythms no longer numb. The distractions fail. And when the night stretches long and unyielding, she can no longer pretend. The descent has begun. Here, in the pitch of solitude, the ghosts arrive. Not ghosts of the dead, but of the forgotten. Old dreams, abandoned parts of herself, betrayals left unspoken. They drift through the corridors of her memory with no faces, only feelings. Grief like cold ash. Loneliness like a hollowed tree. Rage like a fire that never learned to burn clean. This is not depression. This is initiation. Carl Jung wrote that no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The Nigredo is that downward journey, not a punishment but a purification, not a fall but a forging. She begins to cry without knowing why. She finds herself awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, body aching with memory. Not memory of events, but of absences. The love she needed and never received. The truth she swallowed to survive. The self she abandoned to be accepted. This is grief, not just for what happened, but for what never did. It is a kind of death, but not of the body. A death of illusions. A death of all the false names she wore to belong. She feels like she is losing herself, and in a way, she is, but only the self that was never truly hers. In the dark, everything slows. She stops pretending she is okay. She stops trying to fix, to improve, to transcend. She sinks. She lets the ache have her, and in that surrender, something ancient stirs. There is a wisdom in the dark, though it speaks in riddles. It does not comfort, it reveals. It peels back every layer of performance until she is naked with her own soul. There is no one left to impress here, no masks to wear, only the raw self, aching, honest, unpolished. She remembers the story of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who descended into the underworld. Layer by layer, Inanna was stripped of her adornments, her crown, her robe, her jewels, until she stood bare before her shadow sister, Ereshkigal, the Queen of Death. This too is her journey. She is being stripped of what is not essential: titles, roles, projections, pleasing, proving, posturing. Each one falls like a garment to the floor of the psyche. Each one a lie she mistook for identity. Each one a weight she carried too long. She wants to run, to climb back into the light. But there is no ladder in the Nigredo. Only fire. Only waiting. And yet, within the despair, something quiet glows. The black sun, the secret symbol of alchemy. Not the golden radiance of noon, but the hidden light that shines only in darkness. A light that does not blind, but reveals. She sees for the first time the architecture of her own soul. Not the version she curated for others, but the truth beneath. The fractures, the gold veins running through them, the paradoxes that make her whole. She sees that her strength was never in her perfection, but in her willingness to break. And breaking, here, is not the end. It is the beginning of transformation. Because what is false cannot survive the fire. The part of her that always smiled, even while unraveling, burned. The part that apologized for existing too loudly, burned. The part that believed her worth was tied to being needed, burned. All of it burns. And from the ashes, something new begins to form. Not yet shaped, not yet named, but real. She no longer clings to clarity. She allows the not knowing, the confusion, the fog. Because beneath the chaos, she senses the order emerging. The psyche knows what it's doing. Jung said the self, the deeper wholeness of the individual, moves toward integration on its own accord. Even when the ego resists, even when it hurts. She is being dismantled, not destroyed. Deconstructed, not discarded. Her soul is clearing the debris. And yet, grief floods her still. She mourns the life she tried to make work. The people she loved, who could not meet her there. The dreams that were too small for her true becoming. All of it is honored here. None of it is wasted. She learns to sit with the ashes without trying to reshape them. She lets the sorrow move through her like a tide. And slowly she begins to trust the wisdom of her body, the tears that come without warning, the fatigue that demands rest, the intuition that no longer whispers, but roars. She's becoming sensitive again, not fragile, sensitive, able to feel, able to know, able to be. The false strength of numbness has melted. What remains is alive. In this depth, she begins to speak differently, not to others, but to herself. She stops saying, "What's wrong with me?" and begins asking, "What is this pain trying to teach me?" She stops demanding answers and begins listening for symbols, the dream of drowning, the image of the crumbling house, the memory of a door she never opened. Everything becomes sacred, not because it is easy, but because it is true. The Nigredo teaches her that she is not broken, she is breaking open, and there is a vast difference. One is defeat, the other is rebirth. She writes poetry in the dark now, not for beauty, but for blood. Words that taste like metal and moonlight. She draws without skill. She dances without rhythm. She becomes again a child at the altar of becoming. There is no audience in the Nigredo, only her soul and the fire. And the promise, if you let it burn, you will rise. And so, She lets it burn, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. She no longer fears the fire, because she has learned. It does not consume what is true, only what is false. And what is true is beginning to glow. Not brightly, not yet, but steadily, a coal at the center of her being, a warmth that did not exist before the burning, a knowing that she is not who she was and will never be again. She no longer looks for escape. She begins to look for meaning. What has this pain carved open? What new self is being formed in this cocoon of ash? Who am I? Now that everything else is gone, the answers do not come quickly, but they come in dreams, in symbols, in quiet mornings when her breath feels holy again. And the answers are not sentences. They are sensations, a sense of space in her chest, a peace that comes without explanation, a love for herself that is not loud but unwavering. This is the secret of the Nigredo. It does not give you what you want. It gives you what you are, and what you are is vast. What you are is forged. What you are is sacred. She no longer fears the dark. She recognizes it as part of the cycle, like the moon, like the womb, like winter. And from this black soil, something green will one day rise. But she does not rush it. She honors the time it takes. She wraps herself in blankets made of memory and breath. She lights candles not to banish the dark, but to bless it. She walks slowly through her own ruins, knowing that the goddess of the underworld does not destroy without purpose. She is no longer surviving. She is being reborn, in silence, in shadows, in sacred flame, and when she finally looks in the mirror, she does not see a woman undone. She sees a woman in the firelight, unmasked, unafraid, unfolding. The Nigredo has done its work, and she is still here, not despite the darkness. Because of it, she is still here, and something luminous is beginning to rise. There comes a time in the solitary woman's journey when the silence changes shape. It no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like a presence, something watching from the corners, something stirring beneath the floorboards of her mind. Not an intruder, but a twin she has long forgotten. This is the shadow, the hidden one, the buried sister, the bearer of all she was told to cast away. She does not arrive with kindness. She arrives with teeth, and yet there is no malice, only memory. Here in the quiet sanctum of a life lived alone, there are no more roles to hide behind. No applause to earn, no reflection offered by another's gaze. Just the mirror of the self, unfiltered, unedited, and into this mirror steps the shadow. At first, she recoils. She sees flashes, rage she never voiced, desires she never dared speak, power she once disowned. All the parts she deemed too much, too wild, too selfish, too loud. They do not knock politely. They erupt. She finds herself irritated by small things, frustrated with people who no longer orbit her world, grieving old betrayals that never had space to breathe. She wonders, where is this coming from? But the question is not where. It is who. This is the return of the repressed. Jung called the shadow the thing a person has no wish to be. It is everything we exile in order to belong. Everything the persona, the mask of social self, was built to conceal. And in solitude, there is nowhere left to hide. She sees the faces of her shadow now, not as monsters, but as neglected children. The version of her that was angry when no one listened. The one who wanted too much, felt too deeply, loved without restraint. The one who wanted to speak but stayed silent. The one who wanted to leave but stayed anyway. They come back, not to harm her but to be seen. She is frightened at first, because power, when long suppressed, appears as threat. But she breathes. She stays. She does not run from the mirror, and slowly, The shapes take form. She meets the shadow not as a demon, but as a doorway. And what was once terrifying becomes tender. She begins to understand. These exiled parts were not evil. They were simply unloved. She recalls the myth of Persephone, taken into the underworld, crowned queen of the dead. But what if she was never taken? What if she chose to descend? This, too, is descent. Not into death, but into truth. Her shadow is not separate from her. It is her, the half that has waited in the dark. And now, in the dim threshold of becoming, they speak, not in language but in feeling, visceral, unignorable. She writes in her journal, and her hand trembles. She says things aloud she never thought she'd admit. She finds herself laughing at old wounds, not because they are funny, but because she finally sees how human she was trying to survive. The shadow is not here to punish her. It is here to free her. It shows her the roots of her people-pleasing, how it was born of fear, not virtue. It shows her the source of her silence, how it protected her once, but now cages her. It shows her the aggression she swallowed, now turned inward as shame, and she begins to weep, because she sees how long she carried a war within, not between good and bad, but between real and acceptable. And now she is choosing the real. This is the threshold of individuation, not becoming someone else, but becoming fully herself, no longer edited for approval, no longer diluted for comfort, but whole. This wholeness is not peace at first, it is chaos, because what was once hidden now clamors for space. She dreams of wolves, of fire, of tidal waves, symbols of what she once feared in herself. But instead of waking in panic, she begins to listen. The wolf is not the enemy. The fire is not punishment. The wave is not destruction. They are power, reclaimed. She stands at the mirror and says, I am angry. I am wild. I want more. I want everything. And the world does not end. In fact, it begins. Because now she is no longer playing a role. She is writing her own myth. There is still shame, still resistance. Decades of conditioning do not melt overnight, but each day she chooses a little more truth. She speaks up when she would have shrunk. She says no without apology. She chooses solitude not as exile, but as a sacred stance, and the shadow nods in approval, not as a monster appeased, but as a sister welcomed home. She learns that the shadow does not disappear when embraced. It transforms. It becomes creativity. It becomes intuition. It becomes vitality. What she once feared as darkness now becomes the wellspring of her light. And in that paradox, she is made whole, not perfect, not healed in the tidy sense, but integrated. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of enantiodromia, the tendency of all things to turn into their opposite. The darkness becomes a doorway. The feared becomes the familiar. The rejected becomes the root. She no longer seeks only the light. She walks with the dark, and in doing so she finds balance. She notices she is less reactive, less desperate for validation, less afraid of being misunderstood, because she understands herself. Not just the curated parts, but all of her. The rage that taught her boundaries, the grief that softened her pride, the envy that revealed her desires, the bitterness that marked where love was once betrayed. She no longer judges these emotions. She thanks them. They were messages, messengers, archetypes of transformation. And she is the vessel in which they are finally allowed to live. She begins to feel a quiet power growing, not the power of dominance, but of depth. It does not shout. It hums, a hum in her bones, a vibration in her chest. The sense that she is no longer afraid of herself. This is what changes everything. Not that she has eliminated her flaws, but that she has reclaimed them. She walks now with her head high, not because she feels above others, but because she no longer hides beneath them. She no longer dims to make others comfortable. She no longer performs goodness. She is herself, and that is enough. She revisits old memories, not to suffer them again, but to rewrite their meaning. That time she screamed into the pillow at 17. She was learning her voice. That night she left and never looked back. She was claiming her life. That season when she felt numb and hollow. She was gestating, becoming. Every wound, every silence, every shadow was part of the weave. Now she wears them like threads of gold, not hidden, not ashamed, but sacred. This is the work of the inner marriage, the union of opposites, anima and animus, light and shadow, ego and self. She does not erase the ego, she integrates it. She does not conquer the shadow, she partners with it. And together they form a life that is not perfect, but true. She begins to feel love again, not from another, not yet, but from within. A love that says, even this belongs, even the flaws, even the failures, even the fears. There is room for all of it, and in this vast inner room she begins to dance, not for the gaze of others, not for praise, but because she is free. The shadow smiles. It has done its work, no longer banished, no longer feared. It now walks beside her, a guardian, a mirror, a guide. And as she steps across the threshold into the next season of her becoming, she does not say goodbye to the dark. She nods to it. She blesses it. She thanks it for the fire. For it was in that fire she remembered her name. The one beneath all names. The one no one else could give her. The one only the soul knows. And now she lives from that name, unhidden, unashamed, unbreakable. There is a silence deeper than absence. Not the silence of emptiness, but of presence, of something ancient stirring beneath the noise, of a soul returning to itself. This is the silence of the hermit, not the one cast out, but the one who chooses the cave. She does not retreat because she is broken. She retreats because she is blooming. The world once demanded her to perform, to speak, to give, to smile on command. But now she listens, she walks away, not in bitterness, but in reverence. From the crowded banquet of the inauthentic, from the noise of shoulds, of roles, of masks, she finds her way to the margins, not the end of the world, but the beginning of another one, a secret place, a psychic garden, one that has waited for her all along. At first it is barren. The old roots have been burned. The roles she once wore, daughter, lover, pleaser, achiever, now lie like ashes beneath her feet. It is tempting to rebuild them, to pick up their brittle shapes and try again. But something in her says, no, not this time. This time she plants something else, not for approval, not for performance, but for truth. The first seeds are small, a breath that fills her lungs like a prayer, a moment of stillness that feels like home. A word written in her journal that surprises even her. She does not rush them. She tends them slowly, as one would tend a sacred fire. This is the garden of the self. Jung spoke of the self as the totality, the integration of all parts, conscious and unconscious. It is not a goal to achieve, but a presence to allow. And it cannot be accessed through noise. It must be grown in quiet. And so, like the hermit of myth, she lights her lantern and turns inward. Not to escape the world, but to perceive it more clearly. She withdraws from shallow conversation. She turns off the screen that flickers with borrowed dreams. She stops answering out of guilt and starts responding from soul. At first, the silence is jarring. There is no feedback, no mirror, no affirmation. But slowly, the silence becomes soil and something begins to root. She dreams more vividly now. Images rise from the unconscious like messengers, owls, oceans, keys, lost children, open doors. She writes them down, not to analyze, but to befriend. Each one is a symbol, a piece of her own myth unfolding. She realizes she is not lonely. She is accompanied by her own depths, by the archetypes that live beneath her surface, by the voice she forgot in all the striving. She begins to hear that voice again, not loud but steady. It tells her when to rest, when to walk, when to say no, even if no one understands, and she listens. This is the return of intuition, not as impulse, but as knowing, a compass that doesn't point north but inward. She starts to trust it, to water it, to let it guide her. And the garden grows, at first with weeds, griefs unspoken, regrets long buried. But even weeds feed the soil when tended. She does not pull them out in haste. She studies them. She asks them what they came to teach, and they answer. The grief teaches her what she loved. The regret teaches her what she values. The longing teaches her what she has forgotten to seek. Nothing is wasted. In this garden, everything belongs. There are no shoulds here, no one watching. Only the quiet contract between her soul and its soil. She places stones around the perimeter. Boundaries, not walls. She lets in only what nourishes, not from fear, from discernment. This is sovereignty, not the kind that postures, but the kind that knows. She walks barefoot now, not just in the grass, but in her life. Each step intentional, each moment a dialogue with the sacred. She notices small things again. The way light falls across her floor in the morning, the scent of her own skin after rain, the sound of her own breath when she no longer resists it. She is no longer performing her life. She is living it, and it is not loud. It is symphonic in silence. She begins to speak to the plants in her care. She finds poetry in their growth, how they reach not only for the sun, but for the dark earth too, how they open only when ready. There is no rush in nature, only rhythm. She aligns with that rhythm, the lunar pull, the tide within. She stops forcing bloom. She begins to honor fallow seasons. She no longer fears emptiness. She knows it as space, space for emergence, for depth, for soul. In the world outside, people may call her withdrawn, detached, hard to reach, but they do not know the richness of this garden. They do not hear the music she hears, the cello hum of solitude, the rustle of ancestral memory, the soft drumbeat of her own becoming. She learns the art of creative waiting, not passive, but potent. She paints not to impress, but to release. She sings not to be heard, but to feel her own voice resonate in her bones. She moves not to be seen, but to express what language cannot touch. Her creativity becomes devotional, a ritual, an offering, a conversation with mystery. She lights candles for no one but herself. She says prayers not in words but in presence. And she begins to feel something blooming inside her. Not a product, not a brand, a truth, unshaped by the world, unconcerned with approval. It is enough to exist, to feel, to be. She is learning the sacred art of being, in a culture that worships doing, and in that radical stillness, she finds her soul again, not as an abstract idea, but as a felt reality. She sees now that her aloneness was never a punishment. It was a summons, a call inward, a return. The hermit archetype has shown her the lantern within. Now she carries it with grace, not to shine for others, but to illuminate her own path. She walks not in certainty, but in trust. She does not always know where she is going, but she knows she is rooted. She has met herself in the silence and found her holy. She no longer needs to be filled. She no longer leaks. The garden has taught her containment. She has become the vessel, the chalice, the womb, and in this womb of stillness, new life stirs. Ideas take form, not from scarcity, but from abundance. Love arises, not from need, but from overflow. Vision emerges, not from pressure, but from peace. She is no longer chasing, she is cultivating, and what she grows now cannot be bought, it cannot be performed, it cannot be lost. It is hers, grown from within, watered by time. Ripened in solitude, this is the inner garden, the sacred grove, the temple built in silence, and she guards it fiercely, not out of fear, but out of devotion. For she knows now that from this place all else flows, love, creation, connection, not as escape from herself, but as expression of herself. The hermit has done his work. He has shown her the light within. He has taught her to trust what blooms in darkness. He has handed her the key, and now she turns the lock, not to close the door, but to open it, to step forward not as a mask, but as a soul, not seeking completion, but offering wholeness. And when she steps into the world again, it will not be to prove anything. It will be to give from the garden she grew in secret, a garden that bears fruit not for fame, but for nourishment, for the ones who know silence, for the ones who have walked through fire, for the ones still trying to remember who they are beneath the noise. She will carry seeds for them, not as savior, but as sister, because she knows now the garden grows in all of us, if only we dare to leave the noise behind, if only we choose to listen. In the soft hush after solitude, when the garden has rooted itself in silence, a new sound stirs, not loud, not sudden, but ancient. It is not a voice you hear with your ears. It is a resonance, a vibration within, a memory that does not come from mind, but from marrow. It is her, the forgotten one, the Anima. She does not arrive with fanfare, for she was never truly gone. She was only veiled, hidden beneath duty, distraction, the weight of old expectations. She was never lost, only silenced. And now, in this space you've carved with care, she returns. First in dreams, symbols shimmering beneath waking thought, a river winding through a twilight forest, a mother owl in the branches, a mirror that shows not your face, but your flame. She emerges not as image, but as feeling, not as doctrine, but as rhythm. She is the sacred feminine, but not the feminine you were taught, not soft for someone else, not beautiful for approval, not quiet to please. She is not a performance. She is a presence. The Anima is not a role. She is a return to intuition, to body, to moonlight ways of knowing. She is the temple inside the cave. She is the well that does not run dry. She is the tide within your chest that cannot be reasoned with. And now you feel her echo in you. She is in your hunger for the mysterious, in the way your hands linger over soil or water or your own skin. She is in the tears that come without reason, in the art you create without knowing why, in the longings that no longer frighten you. She is not linear. She is not logical. She does not explain herself. She moves in spirals, in cycles, in sacred irrationalities, and you, at last, are learning to follow. You do not demand she make sense. You let her shape you, unmake you, awaken you. This is the return of the inner feminine, not as ornament, but as origin. You remember now that the Anima lives in all souls, regardless of form or gender. She is the receptive current, the soul's feeling function, the wisdom of the dark. Jung taught that to integrate her is to integrate life itself, and so you stop resisting the tide. You learn to sit with feeling, not fix it. to let sadness speak without silencing it, to let desire stretch its limbs without shame. You become less interested in answers, more attuned to essence. You realize that truth is not always clarity. Sometimes it is confusion that breaks the shell of the false. The anima does not hand you a map. She becomes the compass. The pull. You begin to orient by her whisper. You say yes when it feels warm in your belly. You say no when your chest tightens. You walk away when your soul grows quiet. You linger when your eyes soften. You trust sensation over strategy. You trust beauty over approval. You trust your own pulse. This is not regression. This is remembrance. The anima is not your weakness. She is your root. You see now how you were taught to fear her, to name her chaotic, hysterical, weak. But what they feared was not weakness. It was wildness. The anima is untamed. And what is untamed cannot be controlled, and what cannot be controlled must be exiled. So you exiled her long ago. You dimmed her dreams. You covered her skin. You hardened your voice. You became what the world rewarded, predictable, productive, pleasing. But something in you never forgot. And now she sings again, not loud, but deep. A lullaby from the cave, a pulse in the bones, a knowing that needs no proof. She teaches you to move differently, to pause before answering, to feel the room before speaking, to enter your body before deciding. You begin to inhabit your life, not just survive it. You taste your food. You speak with your eyes. You rest without apology. And slowly, the temple returns. It was never made of stone. It was made of you, your hips swaying to music no one hears, your tears falling like rain on sacred soil, your fingers threading through your own hair with reverence. This is the inner altar, the sacred feminine unhidden. You light candles not to perform a ritual, but because your soul is aflame. You wear what makes you feel like wind. You choose colors like you choose prayers. You let your body be art, not for display, for devotion. And devotion changes everything. You stop asking what you should do. You start asking what your soul craves, not from impulse, but from intimacy. You become a lover of your own mystery. You no longer need to explain why something feels right. You trust that it does. You no longer seek a witness. You become one. 2. Your own becoming, to your own blossoming, to your own return, because that is what this is, a return, to the feminine within, to the wellspring, to the original voice. And her voice is not always sweet. Sometimes she is fierce. Sometimes she is the storm that breaks your false calm. Sometimes she is the scream that rises from silence and shakes your bones clean. But even this is love. She is the part of you that will not let you lie to yourself anymore. She is the one who will rip open the dream so you can be reborn. She is the death before the truth, the fire before the seed, the wild howl that says enough. And when she says enough, you listen. You no longer betray yourself to belong. You no longer perform your truth in parts. You show up whole or not at all, and in doing so, you find those who see you, not as a role. Not as a use, as a soul. This is what the anima brings. Not safety, but sovereignty. Not comfort, but communion. Not answers, but the sacred capacity to live the questions fully. And now, your dreams deepen. You see her in the woods again, barefoot. Eyes like dusk, hands full of honey and thorns. She is not here to lead you away. She is here to walk with you, to remind you that love is not a cage. It is a current. That strength is not stoic. It is supple. That power is not dominance. It is presence. You no longer mistake hardness for worth. You understand now that to be soft is to be strong. To be open is to be wise. To feel is to know. And in this knowing, You find yourself again, not the self you were taught, not the self you constructed to survive, but the self that was there before the forgetting. She is not perfect. She is whole. She is not tame. She is true. She is not easy to explain, but she is impossible to replace. You bow to her now. You thank her for returning. You promise not to leave her behind again, and she smiles because she knew you would find your way back. You always do. All souls carry her. All wounds crave her. All awakenings begin with her echo, and now that echo lives in you, not as a ghost but as a guide, not as a whisper, but as a wave. You walk forward, not away from her, but with her, she in your breath, she in your gaze, she in the way your body remembers what the mind forgot. And the world does not have to understand. This is not for the world. This is for the temple, the one inside your chest, the one you tend now with every step, every choice, every truth you dare to live. The Anima is no longer a stranger. She is you, remembered, reclaimed, reborn. He comes not with force, but with a question, not a lover, not a father, not a savior, but a shape in the mirror that no longer reflects someone else. The Animus, the masculine within, not the outer men you chased, loved, feared, or fled, but the image of the masculine you housed within yourself. He has lived there, quietly, for longer than you can name, sometimes loud with opinions, sometimes silent with judgment, a shadowed king, a false prophet, a wandering knight, a ghost of all you were taught a man should be. He has spoken as your inner critic, commanding you to achieve, to control, to conquer. He has whispered in the voices of old teachers, fathers, lovers. He has demanded logic when you ached for feeling. He has built walls when you hungered for water. He has taught you to mistrust your own knowing. But now you turn toward him, not to silence him, not to obey him, but to see him as he truly is, no longer projected outward onto bodies and faces that could never hold his totality, no longer mistaken for authority or validation or rescue. You stop seeking him in others. You call him home. This is the dance with the Animus. And it begins in the place where your Anima sings. For it is she who summons him, not to complete you, but to make you sovereign. This union is not romantic, it is alchemical. It is the sacred conjunctio, the inner marriage, the fusion of opposites that Jung described as the true goal of individuation. And yet, before union, you must know him in all his forms. The distorted Animus rises first, the tyrant, the seducer, the cold logician, the impatient master. He tells you to doubt, to prove, to perfect. He mocks your softness. He dissects your feelings. He turns tenderness into weakness and wisdom into noise. He tells you you're not enough unless you're exceptional, that to rest is to regress, that to speak gently is to be unheard. You recognize these voices now. They are not yours. They never were. They are the echoes of a world that forgot how to hold the feminine, a world that crowned domination as strength and cut down anything that bloomed without permission. But you do not exile this Animus. You face him. You say, I see you. I know who you once had to be. But I no longer need your armor, and he listens. Because you speak with the voice of the whole. Slowly his edges soften. The tyrant becomes the protector. The logician becomes the guide. The seducer becomes the initiator. The impatient one becomes the visionary. This is not erasure. It is transmutation. You are not killing the masculine within. You are liberating him from distortion, from inflation, from centuries of fear. You make space for his divine form, the Animus, as inner clarity, as steadfast presence, as sword and shelter. as the force that acts without dominance and speaks without demand. He becomes your spine, not your jailer, your structure, not your cage, and with him you create, not to be seen, but because something sacred longs to move through you. With him you act not to control, but to serve the soul's unfolding. With him you say no, not from fear, but from discernment. You learn that boundaries are holy, that direction is not aggression, that to lead does not require disconnection. Together, you enter sacred dialogue. The feminine receives, the masculine responds, the feminine dreams. The masculine builds, the feminine senses, the masculine moves, and the dance becomes effortless. Not rigid steps, but attunement. No longer competition between parts, but choreography. He no longer tells you who to be. He waits for her signal. He listens. He trusts. He follows the current without needing to dam it. This is what it means to become whole. Not to erase duality, but to integrate it. You do not lose your feminine in this union. She grows stronger, for when she no longer fights the distorted masculine, within she can finally open, and in her opening he is healed. The Animus, in his sacred form, does not demand submission. He offers devotion. He builds temples, not prisons. He holds space, not silence. He carries wisdom, not opinion. He becomes the guardian of your becoming, and you, in this holy union, are no longer half of yourself. You are not waiting to be chosen. You are not longing to be saved. You are not dependent on the world to reflect your worth. You are sovereign, because you have integrated the authority you once sought outside. You have stopped projecting your power onto teachers, lovers, leaders, gods. You have drawn the Animus inward, and now he bows to the self, not the ego, not the persona, but the self, the living center of the psyche, that which transcends and includes, that which knows before you understand, that which waits silently behind every mask. It is here, in this stillness, that the conjunctio completes itself. Masculine and feminine, no longer at war, no longer strangers, no longer exiled, but fused, not into sameness, but into harmony. You feel it in your breath. Balanced, rooted, expansive. You feel it in your choices, no longer reactive, but conscious, aligned. You feel it in your presence, unshakable, not because you are invulnerable, but because you are integrated. The dance continues, always. The work of wholeness never ends. But now you no longer fear your inner other. You welcome him, not as master, not as rescuer, not as judge, but as beloved. The part of you that makes action possible, that moves vision into form, that protects the sacred without possession. He does not eclipse the feminine. He serves her flowering, and in that devotion, he too is fulfilled. This is the inner union the world forgets, the sacred alchemy that does not depend on outer partnership, the marriage of soul and soul. You are no longer the child waiting for permission. You are no longer the seeker chasing fragments. You are the sovereign, crowned not by ego, but by integration. You have learned to hold paradox, to be both still and in motion, to be both receptive and directive, to be both soft and sharp. You are no longer split. You are no longer seeking your missing half in another's eyes. You are whole, and from this wholeness you can love without clinging. Lead without dominating, speak without shouting, build without breaking, because the Animus no longer acts alone. He walks beside the Anima. He listens to her dream and makes it real. He trusts her silence. He respects her depth. Together, they are creation. Together, they are transformation. Together, they are truth. And you are the vessel. You are the dance, the joining, the flame that holds both heat and light. You move now with grace. Not the grace of perfection, but the grace of alignment, and the world may not understand. But the world is not your compass anymore. You walk to a deeper rhythm, one born not from should, but from soul. And the animus within you, transformed, redeemed, integrated, is not the voice of control. He is the echo of purpose. He is the fire that forges but does not burn. He is the clarity that cuts but does not wound. He is the action that serves life, not ego. And he is yours now, not as possession, but as partner. You bow to him. He bows to her. They bow to the self. And you, rise. There comes a moment when the mirror grows quiet, no longer a stage, no longer a sentence, no longer a shrine to the gaze of others. The glass, once crowded with borrowed eyes, goes still. And in that stillness, you meet yourself not as appearance, but as presence. The woman you used to be. Her body taught to twist, perform, please, was shaped by reflection, trained in the currency of approval, measured by attention, defined by echoes, every glance a lesson, every silence a verdict. Even your rebellions were rehearsals for someone else's script. But now, the mirrors have been turned to the wall. You are alone, not abandoned, but returned to the sanctuary of your own becoming. There is no one watching, no one naming, no one framing you in praise or projection. And for a moment, the silence is terrifying. Because without the gaze, who are you? Who are you when you are not being seen? This is the death of the persona, the unraveling of the mask you wore for belonging. And it is not a gentle undoing. It scrapes, it strips, it severs your tether to identity as reflection. You grieve, not for what was true, but for what you thought you had to be. The girl shaped by eyes, the woman sculpted by should, the mother, daughter, lover, muse, each one an image built on the scaffolding of someone else's longing. But now, there is only you, and there is no mirror but the one inside. Here, you do not pose, you do not explain. You do not edit your essence to become more palatable. You learn to sit with your nakedness, with your unknown, with your vastness, and something begins to stir. Not the echo of old identities, but the quiet hum of the self, not the self of stories, but the self beyond form, the eternal presence behind your eyes, the witness beneath your thoughts, the source beneath the name. You begin to feel it, not as something you must prove, but something you must remember. It is not loud. It does not demand, it waits, it breathes, it simply is. And in that isness, you dissolve the hunger to be seen, not because you don't deserve to be seen, but because you no longer require the mirror to exist. You become sovereign in your visibility. You choose when to reveal and when to remain hidden. You do not vanish. You emerge. But this emergence is different. It is not performance. It is not spectacle. It is not barter for love. It is the unveiling of the soul. And with it comes a freedom so raw, so untamed, that it frightens the part of you still tethered to the gaze. Because now you are not here to be approved of. You are here to be, to embody what only you can carry, to speak what only you can say, to birth what only your hands can shape. You are no longer a mirror. You are fire. And fire does not reflect. It illuminates. This is the final crucible of individuation, where the persona shatters, the shadow integrates, the opposites merge, and the self emerges not as an image, but as presence. It is not about finding yourself. It is about shedding everything that isn't you, all the masks, all all the myths, all the mirrors, even the sacred ones, even the ones that once kept you safe. You bless them, and you let them go. Because now you no longer ask the world, "Who am I?" You ask, "What am I here to give?" And the answer does not come as a sentence. It comes as a movement, a vibration, a current pulling you deeper into your own core. You no longer need an audience. You need alignment. You no longer crave applause. You crave authenticity. You no longer shape yourself around what is wanted. You root yourself in what is true. And truth is not always beautiful, but it is always liberating. This is the paradox of freedom. You become most visible when you stop performing. You become most magnetic when you stop trying to be liked. You become most powerful when you stop seeking power and start living your essence. And essence, unlike persona, cannot be replicated. It is not curated. It is not marketed. It is not manufactured. It is remembered. It is the scent of your soul before the world covered it in perfume. It is the original rhythm of your heartbeat before it was silenced by expectation. And when you live from this place, this essence, you no longer distort yourself to be loved. You become love, not the soft, sweet love of fairy tales, but the fierce, grounded love of truth, the kind of love that creates, that destroys illusions, that liberates by its very presence. You are that presence now. And because of this, you no longer confuse being seen with being known. You understand, not every eye deserves access, not every voice deserves influence. Your worth is not on trial in every interaction. You become the gatekeeper of your own sanctuary, and you learn the beauty of sacred invisibility, not hiding, but choosing. You no longer live to be consumed. You live to be whole. This wholeness does not always look like what others expect. Sometimes it is wild. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it walks away from everything familiar, but it always carries the signature of your soul. And in this remembering, you stop measuring yourself by reflection. The mirror becomes irrelevant because you are no longer the reflection. You are the source. You are the river, not the image on its surface. You are the flame, not the shadows it casts. You are the temple, not the praise it receives. This is not ego. This is essence. Ego says, "I am special." Essence says, "I am here." Ego seeks distinction. Essence seeks alignment. Ego competes. Essence radiates. And from this place, creation becomes effortless, not because it is easy, but because it is true. You write what must be written. You say what must be said. You become what must be born, not because anyone asked you to, but because something ancient within you has finally been given room to rise. The muse is no longer outside. She lives in your marrow. The god is no longer above. He breathes in your blood. The self is no longer an idea. It is your center. And now you move from this center, not to prove, not to justify, not to perform, but to live, fully, unapologetically, sacredly. And if no one claps, you still dance. If no one watches, you still shine. If no one understands, you still speak. Because the mirror without reflection does not mean absence. It means freedom. Freedom to be without distortion. Freedom to act without approval. Freedom to belong to yourself. You are no longer defined, you are expressed. And in this final breath of becoming, you understand. You are not the creation of the world. You are the world becoming conscious through creation. You are not the sum of others' perceptions. You are the source that sees. You are not the reflection. You are the flame. There is a rhythm older than memory, a pulse beneath the noise, beneath the striving, beneath the stories you were taught to cling to. It is not linear. It is not logical. It is not concerned with your plans or your timelines. It is the spiral of your soul. The wheel that turns, again and again and again, life into death and death into life. You were not taught to honor this. You were taught to ascend, to build, to bloom and stay blooming, to rise and never fall. But the psyche has its own seasons, and the soul speaks in winters as well as summers, in decay as well as creation, and so you found yourself in the quiet, in the solitude, in the cold hush after the collapse, and at first you feared it. Because no one tells you that the soul must die to be reborn, but there is a holiness to the falling away. It strips you, not to punish, but to reveal, not to wound, but to reweave. And as you surrendered, slowly, reluctantly, tearfully, you began to hear it, the turning of your own wheel, not the clock, not the calendar, the ancient rhythm of becoming and unbecoming that pulses through all things. You saw it in the trees, letting go of their leaves without resistance. You saw it in the moon, disappearing into darkness without fear. You saw it in yourself, as parts you once clung to crumbled to ash so something deeper could breathe. This is not annihilation. This is transformation. The ego calls it death. The self calls it rebirth. This is the sacred paradox. You are most alive when something in you dies, and not just once, but over and over again. You are not a statue. You are not a fixed identity. You are the phoenix, the myth that burns to ash and rises from her own flame. This is the alchemy of the soul. It does not polish you. It dismantles you. It brings fire, not comfort. Abyss, not applause. And in that abyss, you learn to trust the silence, to listen not with your ears, but with your bones. You feel the subtle shift, when something within you begins to unravel, not because it is wrong, but because it has served its time. And rather than cling, you bow. You honor the death as sacred. You feel the ache. Yes, you feel the grief deeply. But beneath it, you begin to feel something else. Peace, not the peace of avoidance, not the peace of perfection, the peace of alignment, of living in harmony with the deeper pulse of your becoming. You realize, you do not have to hold what is falling. You do not have to resuscitate what is complete. You do not have to fear the winter inside you, because winter is not the end. It is the womb of spring. It is the place where seeds root deeper, where wisdom crystallizes, where the soul gathers herself again, and so you begin to live differently. You no longer demand constant harvest. You no longer resent the void. You begin to sense when something is dying in you, a belief, a role, a desire, and instead of resisting, you breathe with it. You let it shed, and you trust that what remains is truer than what was lost. This is the rhythm of life. Death life. It is not neat. It is not linear. It is not comfortable, but it is holy, and it is yours. You see now how every death prepared you for a deeper homecoming. Every ending carved space for something more real. Not always more beautiful, not always more pleasurable, but more real. And reality, when lived in wholeness, becomes its own kind of beauty. Because when you live the cycle fully, when you let the fire burn, let the ash fall, let the silence reign, you discover that what dies was never the essence, only the costume, only the skin, only the illusion, and what remains is untouchable. What remains is the self, the one who does not flinch in the dark, the one who does not panic when the leaves fall, the one who knows that true transformation requires the loss of what is no longer true. You are learning to walk with her now, not the mask, not the role, the woman beneath it all, the one who does not fear her own endings, because she knows they are the path to her becoming. And in this trust, you find a new kind of power, not the power to force or control, but the power to surrender, to bow when the wheel turns, to let the chapter close, to let the snake shed its skin, to let the fruit fall from the branch. And in this surrender, you become whole. Because nothing is exiled now, not your grief, not your rage, not your lostness. Each one has a place in the rhythm, each one has a season. You begin to live in sacred timing. You stop rushing, you stop pushing, you move with the river instead of against it. You listen to your dreams, to your body, to the subtle currents pulling you inward, and what was once noise becomes music. What was once silence becomes guidance. What was once death becomes initiation. You become the priestess of your own seasons. You do not wait for the world to name your spring. You feel it rise in your chest like breath after drowning. You do not fear the dark anymore, because you know you carry your own flame. And even when you cannot see, you trust the path beneath your feet. This trust, this fierce, quiet knowing, is the birthright you reclaim with every cycle, and you begin to love yourself not in spite of your deaths, but because of them. You are not the sum of your survival. You are the sacred pulse that chooses to begin again. You are not the brokenness. You are the rebuilder. You are not the ending. You are the one who rises again and again and again. This is the medicine of the phoenix, not just resurrection, but the wisdom to know when to burn, not just flight, but the courage to fall, not just light, but the willingness to enter the night and let it teach you, and so you become a living flame, a cycle in motion, a woman who trusts the sacred timing of her soul, no longer resisting the death, no longer rushing the rebirth, but allowing each phase to do its work in you, letting each breath carry the rhythm of everything you've ever been and everything you're still becoming, because there is no final form, there is only the next becoming, the next remembering, the next sacred letting go. And when you live like this, in rhythm with your own wheel, you no longer fear the fall, you welcome it, because you know what falls away is never lost. It becomes the soil, it becomes the ash that feeds the next flame. It becomes the silence in which the soul speaks, and so you walk forward, not armored but open, not certain but aligned, not unbreakable but unafraid of breaking. You carry your seasons like sacred scrolls. You carry your deaths like holy passages. You carry your rebirths not as proof of your worth, but as evidence of your becoming. And the world, though it may not understand, feels your rhythm, not as noise, but as truth, not as performance, but as presence, not as perfection, but as power, the quiet, steady power of a soul who has burned and still sings, who has lost and still lives, who has died and knows how to rise. Again, and again, and again. There comes a moment in the long pilgrimage of the soul when the ego, with all its striving and cleverness, must bow, not out of defeat, but out of recognition, a silent, sacred acknowledgement that there is something greater, older, and more whole than itself. This is the moment when you begin to sense the self, not as an idea, not as an achievement, but as a presence, a living sanctuary within you, untouched by the restless mind. A temple that has stood through countless storms, waiting quietly for you to come home. You feel it first as a whisper beneath the chatter of your thoughts, a subtle current beneath the waves of your feelings. It does not shout or demand. It simply is, and in this presence you find yourself slowing down. The hurried rhythm of the ego fades into stillness. The endless to-do lists and the ceaseless need for validation soften into silence. This silence is not emptiness. It is fullness, a fullness that carries the weight of eternity. Your inner world begins to transform. What was once chaotic and cluttered now breathes with intention. Each object in your space, each corner of your being becomes an altar. Sacred, deliberate, charged with meaning. A worn chair becomes a throne for your reflection. A flickering candle, the flame of your awakening. A simple cup, a vessel not just for water, but for presence. Your home becomes an inner monastery, not built of stone, but of stillness. A sacred geography mapped by ritual and reverence. And you, the solitary pilgrim, move through it with grace. Individuation, the great journey of becoming whole, unfolds here, not as a frantic quest to build or conquer, but as a deep surrender. The surrender of ego's endless striving into the embrace of what is. This is not weakness. It is the strongest act of courage you will ever know. To relinquish control, to trust the unseen, to let go of the self-made masks and meet the self beneath. The self is the axis around which your soul spins, the silent center in the eye of your internal storm. It holds paradox, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious. Here, the opposites meet and dance not as enemies, but as lovers weaving the fabric of wholeness. You learn that surrender is not giving up. It is opening up to the mystery of your being, and with each breath, the temple grows. The walls are your boundaries, strong, yet permeable, protecting your sacred space while allowing the world's whispers to enter. The floor is your groundedness, rooted deep in the earth of your body, anchored in the wisdom of your ancestors. The altar is your awareness, where you place the offerings of your attention, your intention, your love. You discover that ritual is not superstition, but a language of the soul. Each act imbued with meaning, each gesture a prayer to your own becoming. Waking each morning becomes an initiation, a chance to consecrate your day to the unfolding of the self. Eating becomes communion, each bite a moment of gratitude for the sacred nourishment that fuels your journey. Walking becomes a pilgrimage, each step a sacred rhythm in the dance of life. You begin to see the world through new eyes, not as a place to conquer, but as a temple itself. Every tree, every stone, every breath, a sacred symbol reflecting your inner landscape. The persona, the mask you once wore to meet the world, no longer defines you. It is seen for what it is. A necessary garment, worn for function and survival, but never mistaken for the self. You carry it lightly now, aware that it is but one expression among many. The shadow, once feared and hidden, is invited to the altar. No longer banished, no longer silenced. You recognize her as your sister, a fierce guardian of your wholeness. In her darkness lies your power. Her truths, raw and unvarnished, illuminate the path through the labyrinth of your soul. You meet the unconscious, not with fear, but with reverence. It is a vast cathedral of symbols and dreams, each image a prayer, each vision a guide. You descend into its depths, like a mystic into a sacred cave, knowing that the treasures you seek lie buried beneath the rubble of your ego. This is the great enantiodromia, the turning of opposites into unity, where the ego dissolves into the self, and the self rises through the ego. A sacred marriage, the conjunctio, where your inner masculine and feminine entwine, creating a harmony that sings in your bones. You become both priestess and flame, the keeper and the burning, no longer fragmented, no longer divided, but whole. The journey is not linear, is a spiral, a dance of descent and ascent. Sometimes you fall into darkness, Sometimes you rise into light, but each movement brings you closer to the sanctuary within. You learn to honor the seasons of your soul. There is a time to build and a time to rest. Time to fight and a time to surrender. A time to speak and a time to listen. In this sacred rhythm, you find peace. Not the peace of complacency, but the peace of alignment. A peace that carries you through storms, because it is anchored in something eternal. You understand now that the self is not a goal to reach, but a presence to inhabit. It is the stillness beneath your storms, the silence behind your words. It is the eternal flame in your temple, never extinguished, always waiting. And so you become the guardian of this sacred space, not by force but by devotion, not by ego's demand, but by soul's calling. You tend your inner garden with care, weeding out old beliefs that no longer serve, planting seeds of new wisdom and compassion. You light your altar each day, offering gratitude for the gift of becoming. And when the world outside clamors for your attention, you return to your sanctuary. You sit in silence, listen to the sacred. Pulse within and remember who you truly are. This is the temple of the self, not built with stone or mortar, but with presence and love. Not marked on any map, but found deep within, and in this temple, you are home, you are whole, you are sacred, and you are free. There is a sacred sound that the soul must learn, not the clamor of applause, nor the gentle hum of agreement, but the quiet, unyielding power of a single syllable, small as a seed, yet containing the cosmos within its boundaries. This is not a denial born of fear or defiance, but a refusal that is holy, a sacred boundary drawn in the soil of the self. In the beginning, the ego is a child reaching outward, stretching arms to catch the light of others' eyes, willing to bend, to mold, to please, to become the shape that the world demands. But in this bending, something is lost, a fracture deep inside, a quiet voice beneath the noise that whispers, "I am not here." People-pleasing is the shadow of the ego's hunger for approval, a mask worn to hide the nakedness of authentic being. It is a performance on a stage without end, a dance that spins the soul away from itself. But there comes a time when the chrysalis tightens, when the soul's silence grows louder than the applause. She begins to hear the call, the holy sound of refusal. No longer bound by the chains of expectation, she finds her voice in the void. This no is not a wall built to keep others out, but a gate carved from the bedrock of her being, guarding the sanctity of her soul. In this sacred no, there is a paradox. Freedom is found not in open arms, but in closed doors. To say no is to say yes to the deeper truths within. It is a ritual of self-definition, a reclaiming of territory lost to the demands of the world. Living alone, she discovers the vastness of space, not just the empty rooms in her house, but the spaciousness within her heart. Alone is not loneliness. It is the quiet temple where the soul can unfold. Here she learns to honor her limits as holy thresholds, not barriers of fear. Each no becomes a sacred act, a prayer whispered with the strength of mountains. Her boundaries are alive, breathing, with the rhythm of her inner landscape, protecting what is fragile and sacred. They are not rigid walls of separation, but gates that open and close with the wisdom of the seasons. She understands that to be sovereign is not to isolate, but to be rooted in self-love and truth. It is to stand in the power of your own presence, unshaken by the winds of obligation and guilt. This sovereignty is the fruit of her inner marriage, the conjunctio of strength and softness, the union of shadow and light. In the silence of her solitude, she no longer fears rejection, for she has embraced herself wholly. Her no is not a rejection of others, but a devotion to the sacred contract with herself. The power of no ripples outward like sacred water, cleansing old patterns of compulsion, washing away the residue of false necessity. She learns to honor the natural limits of her energy, the delicate contours of her will. No longer does she pour from an empty vessel, but fills herself first, knowing that only from fullness can she give. Her no is a flame of protection, a boundary that radiates from the center of her being, illuminating the path for those who respect her truth. In this sacred refusal, she claims her place in the world, not as a shadow of others' desires, but as a beacon of authentic selfhood. Her voice is the song of the eternal feminine, strong, clear, and unyielding. No longer fragmented by contradiction, she lives in the harmony of inner unity. The sacred no is her gift to herself and to the world. It is the foundation of her inner temple, the altar upon which her sovereignty stands. And so, she walks forward, no longer afraid to say no, knowing that in this refusal, she says yes, to herself, to her wholeness, to her freedom. Beneath the heavy veil of silence, where the outer world falls away like dead leaves in autumn, she finds herself standing at the threshold of the unknown. Here, in this sacred solitude, the surface of her consciousness begins to ripple, and from the depths beneath, a voice rises, soft yet unwavering. This is no ordinary voice. It is the oracle within, ancient as the stars and as profound as the night sky itself. In the beginning, she sought guidance beyond herself, external signs, wise words from others, the fleeting certainty of the visible. Yet all these reflections were but shadows dancing on the cave wall of her own psyche, illusions cast by the persona she wore to meet the world. The ego, eager to grasp control, reached outward, searching for meaning in the mirror of others' eyes. But the deeper truth was buried beneath layers of noise, behind the fortress of the conscious mind. Now the veil thins. The ego, once a tyrant demanding proof and reason, softens into a quiet servant, listening. The oracle speaks not in words but in whispers, symbols, images, dreams that flow like water through the channels of the unconscious. This is the language of the soul, ancient and prophetic, a knowing beyond the reach of logic. Her intuition sharpens like a blade forged in solitude's flame. It is not a fleeting instinct, but a deep, resonant knowledge, an echo from the collective. Unconscious that Jung so revered, this inner voice carries the weight of ancestral wisdom, the mythic stories etched into the human spirit, and the sacred paradox of feminine knowing. To perceive without seeing, to understand without explanation. Dreams become her sacred text, illuminated scrolls unfolding in the theater of night. They speak in riddles and symbols, a serpent curling around the staff, a tower crumbling into mist, a moon bleeding silver light over shadowed waters. Each image is a message from the deeper self, the self, speaking in tongues beyond speech. Here, in the darkened chamber of her psyche, she listens without judgment, without haste. She learns to decipher the silent language of the soul. The silence itself becomes oracle, a temple where answers arise not from the noise of thought, but from the sacred pause between thoughts. In this stillness, the feminine psyche reveals its deepest gift, the power to know without proof, to sense without speech. It is a sacred trust in the invisible currents that flow beneath reality's surface, a faith that the unseen holds the key to wholeness. Solitude, once feared as emptiness, is now a fertile ground for this inner awakening. She walks through the labyrinth of her own being, guided by the flickering torch of intuition. The shadow and light intertwine, enantiodromia in motion, the opposites dancing until they merge into a living whole. Each step draws her closer to the self, the eternal center where all contradictions dissolve into harmony. Here, the persona's mask is gently laid aside, and she meets the oracle face to face, not as a distant figure, but as the very essence of her soul's wisdom. This is not a voice to command or a script to follow, but a sacred dialogue between her and the depths, a conversation as old as time, always renewed. In this place, she learns the art of sacred listening, the humility to surrender to the unknown, and the courage to trust the unseen pathways that guide her home. The oracle within is the flame that does not consume but illuminates, the flame of inner sight that burns away illusion and reveals the radiant truth beneath. She becomes the living vessel of this ancient knowing, a priestess of her own soul's temple, holding the mystery with reverence and grace. The power of the oracle is not to predict or control, but to reveal the subtle rhythms of the psyche's unfolding, cycles of death and rebirth, the sacred spiral of individuation. And so, in the quiet sanctuary of her solitude, she embraces the invisible, the unspoken, the eternal. Her intuition is the compass that guides her through shadow and light, through the depths of silence and the vastness of dreams. In this sacred union with the oracle within, she finds herself reborn, no longer fragmented by doubt or fear, but whole, sovereign, and deeply aligned with the eternal dance of the self. In the stillness, where the world's clamor fades into distant echoes, she arises, not as a shout, but as a gentle illumination. This light, subtle yet unwavering, is born, not from the need to be seen or heard, but from the deep forge of solitude and self-discovery. It is the quiet fire that smolders beneath the ashes of the old self, the flame of transformation that burns without smoke or spectacle. She is the chrysalis unbroken, the silent flame flickering in the darkness, a beacon not for others but for the soul itself. This light does not demand attention. It does not wrestle with the shadows for dominance. It simply is, radiant and whole, the embodied paradox of power in stillness, strength in softness. Here, in the sacred crucible of solitude, she has shed the brittle armor of persona, the mask worn for the world's gaze. No longer fragmented by the external mirrors of validation or identity, she stands as one, integrated, indivisible. The ego's restless striving dissolves like mist before dawn, replaced by the deep, unwavering presence of the self. This is not a becoming. It is an unveiling, a return to the primordial essence beneath all facades. The fire within her is not fueled by desire or fear, but by the profound alchemy of acceptance. It is the flame that consumes without destroying, that purifies without pain. Each moment of solitude has been a stroke of the smith's hammer, shaping her soul with silent precision. In this crucible, the raw ore of her being has been refined into pure light. She does not wait for the world's recognition, nor does she seek to fill an emptiness with fleeting connection. Her wholeness is not contingent, but sovereign, a state born from embracing the shadow as a companion rather than an enemy. The dance of light and dark, the eternal enantiodromia, has brought her to this luminous balance where opposites entwine and transcend their conflict. This light is a living metaphor for the final stage of individuation, the soul in full bloom. Like a night-blooming flower, it unfolds its petals silently, offering fragrance not to the crowd, but to the night itself. It speaks the language of myth and symbol, of phoenix rising from ashes, of Ouroboros devouring its own tail, endlessly renewing. She is both creator and creation, the sacred conjunctio of all inner opposites harmonized. This is the great marriage of the Anima and Animus, the reconciliation of shadow and light, the eternal return of the self to itself. In this state, solitude is no longer absence, but presence, no longer loneliness, but communion. The light she carries is the gift of the soul's long journey inward, through darkness, silence, and solitude. It is the quiet radiance that cannot be dimmed by outer chaos, the inner sun that burns without consuming. She shines not to conquer, but to illuminate, not to proclaim, but to witness. In this luminous being, the paradox of spiritual rebirth is fully realized. To be utterly alone and utterly connected, to be silent and yet resound with truth, to be hidden and yet fully visible in the depths of being. She has become the sacred flame that neither shouts nor fades, a light that whispers to the cosmos, echoing the eternal song of the self. This is the final alchemy, the soul's full bloom, the quiet dawn that breaks without fanfare but with unshakable grace.